Thank you all for coming this morning so early. Great to see you all here. I just want to introduce the amazing sage, the mayor of Hollywood, the alderman of Hollywood, all sorts of things that John has been called through many years, has witnessed what's been happening in our industry, and we're really lucky. John Landgraf, chairman of FX Network. Responsible. We're going to watch a short reel, but responsible for some of the most groundbreaking, innovative television, scripted drama and comedy that we all love. Recently, Alien and Say Nothing. I love The English Teacher, one of my absolute favorite shows. Dying for Sex. Shogun, winner of 18 Emmys, I think. The Bear, 11 Emmys last year. Just an incredible lineup of shows, and all the ones going back in history, The Americans, etc. Incredible. So I think you've described FX as a modest company inside the global streamer. Let's just have a look at the reel and see just how modest it is. You must feel quite proud when you see that.
Yeah, a lot of really wonderful creative people worked on that.
Yeah. That is really amazing. That's the modest output of FX, everyone. John, I know that the people here in this room would really want to hear your perspective on the industry and the challenging opportunity, whatever side of the fence we're all sitting on at the moment. But before we start, it's so much about the creative, I think, for you, and we look at that work there. Can you just talk a bit about what makes an FX show from your point of view, and has that changed? Is that changing? Do you see that changing?
Well, it's interesting, Jane, that reel is something we redo every year. The original version of it, which we did about 10 years ago, was cut to a lecture that James Baldwin gave at the University of Chicago in the 50s, really about the responsibility of the artist. And it was modestly called Manifesto. We don't call it that anymore. But what's interesting is that the shows change. They utterly changed. There's almost no shows, maybe It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, that were in that reel 10 years ago, but it's still the same. Because ultimately it really derives from the human condition, right? And various approaches narratively in terms of genre to sort of trying to give a sense of what it feels to be human and feels to be alive now. And so that's a very vague way of describing a brand. But it's also a very powerful way of describing a brand. It gives you incredible latitude and yet a really deeply specific way of approaching storytelling.
So how do you choose then? What defines the human condition when you've got all those choices to make?
I think we're always trying to find something that's entertaining, but that has deeper levels, right? I think one thing I would say about the way that short form content or other content on the internet works is it doesn't have a lot of subtext. It's all text. And I think the best storytelling has layer upon layer upon layer of deeper meaning. You create an environment in which actors can imagine and bring these incredibly deep and resonant moments and characters. So every time we cut a reel, what are we really looking for? We're looking for moments that human beings, characters are playing that have some kind of deep emotional resonance. Or comedy. Yeah, or comedy, exactly, your English Teacher, which I love. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but if you haven't, it's completely brilliant. And I think to make pure comedy like that is really, really hard. I think it's brilliant. But in terms of working with the creative people, who are responsible for that work, FX is very famous for having brilliant relationships with showrunners. How have you managed to maintain that in this competitive market? Yeah. Well, look, I think my point of view, having run the business now for over 20 years, is that the business is sort of like all the cars in a locomotive, but the engine is really the creator. It's really the person who brings the show, and that's the mode of energy. And so if you find someone who really has a vision and really has a point of view, and you back that vision and back that point of view, what are you doing? Well, you're turbocharging the engine that actually pulls the entire train. And for us, we're very rarely working with people who have experience or who've done it many, many times before. We have a few people like Noah Hawley, who made many seasons of Fargo and Alien, who are homegrown talent. But for the most part, we're almost always working with people who are brand new at it. And they have this extraordinary ability, but what they need is for us to really wrap our arms around them and really support them. And support sometimes means challenge, right? But challenge from the perspective of really understanding what it is they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, right? Because if we come from an outside perspective and we say, well, we want to nip it here and tuck it there, and we want to basically make it more palatable, what we're really doing is just blunting the motive energy behind. And so it's interesting to me that the business has changed utterly in the time I've been there, right? I don't even run a P&L anymore.
Yep.
I ran one for well over a decade. The way we measure success is quite different than it used to be. But I think ultimately one has to take the business apparatus, the structural apparatus, and has to really sublimate it to put it to work to making great storytelling. I think ultimately what I've found is that no matter how much time I spend on math and strategy and numbers, really what it comes down to is, are we making great things? If we are, the business takes care of itself. If we're not, it really doesn't matter what the strategy was, right? So the strategy should ultimately, I think, be find extraordinarily gifted people who have terrific ideas and take as much time, energy, and care as one must in order to bring it to fruition in a really great way, and the business will be fine if we do that.
I completely agree. It's, strategy is making good stuff and working with good people, and that is still the only strategy that creatives and creative leaders have, I think. So Shogun, though, as a piece of risk, as an approach to programming, is a pretty extraordinary swing.
Yeah.
Did you feel you got away with that in terms of you were able to push that through because there was so much success elsewhere? Or was it just, yes, John, back you, go for your vision on that?
Well, look, I would say I'm very, very fortunate to have been in a single place for more than 20 years because, we all have hot streaks and cold streaks, but once you've been doing it for long enough, you gain a measure of credibility and you can take risks that others can't. I can tell you, though, that there was a strategy behind that, which is it was quite clear. When you look underneath the hood of Game of Thrones, what you find is that epics, right, and I'm going all the way back to Lawrence of Arabia and, many, many successful epics, about more than half the 20 most successful films of all time globally are epics. We've stopped making epics out of anything other than, space and the future. Game of Thrones got around that, I think, by fictionalizing medieval Europe, and so there were really very few allegories. It really didn't tread in controversial. And honestly, when I looked at all of the history of Western civilization, I said, I don't know how to do anything here that doesn't trip a whole bunch of wires. Shogun was a book that had been adapted 40 years ago, and at that time they only made half of it because they couldn't do the Japanese part. And here was an entire half of a great book that had never been adapted. But I do think that sometimes when you make a commitment, you really don't understand what you're committing to, right? I didn't realize it was going to take a decade. I didn't realize that ultimately we were not going to be able to find the cast we needed as bilingual speakers. We were going to have to go to Japan. We were going to have to cast a lot of native Japanese speakers. And therefore, we were going to have a show that was more than half in Japanese. So by the time we were done with it, I was terrified, But again, I thought, okay, but this is an epic. And, there is a certain segment of the audience that really loves a good epic. If we can get people to engage, I think it will work. Now, what I will say, Jane, is this is an opportunity created by global streaming that we just didn't have. As a basic cable network in America, we never could have funded it, right? So there's a challenge now of trying to make things, Alien maybe another one of them, that penetrate a global audience and reach some significant portion of the 140 million subscribers that Disney Plus has. I'm actually more worried about where do I find the next Bear, where do I find the next English teacher. But it is exciting to be able to make these very large canvas shows. We never could have done it before without streaming. So you take the tools you have, and you try to apply them to something that interests you, and really more a creator whom you believe in.
And do you think, in terms of FX being now on the Disney platform globally, is that changing what you're looking to buy and make?
Well,
Alien feels like it's in that zone of trying to access a wider audience.
Yeah, Alien was the rare circumstance in more than 22 years that I've actually had access to some corporate IP. It's really the first time.
They'd not let you at it before. They were like, don't.
No, no, because the films really want to do it. But this is a
Yeah.
situation where I think there was a sense that one could do something with a television series that was really different than could be done with a film. But I guess what I would say is I know now that I have to make a few things that really work globally. Both Shogun and Alien will have more consumption outside the United States than inside the United States. That's a really new thing. And I have to have a certain number of things in the slate that achieve that for the benefit of our colleagues in Asia and Latin America and in Europe. But at the end of the day, I'm still trying to find something like The Bear that's rooted in an American vernacular or will work in America, but that also can travel globally. And I know I'm going to make some shows that really are not going to travel globally. I think one of the challenges we all have is really just a funding challenge. This is very, very hard because everything's become so expensive. A lot of the way we got away with so much of what we did is we made it very inexpensively, right? And it's difficult to do that. So you saw a clip there of Ethan Hawke in a new show called The Lowdown that's coming out quite soon. You know, we made that in Oklahoma, which is a rather small state with a tax credit. You know, for us, extremely inexpensively, which meant somewhere a little less than $6 million. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is the thing that launched the studio FX that now produced Alien and Shogun and The Bear. We made that back in the day for $380,000 an episode, right? So the entire economic structure of television has changed. I think partially because we have, trillion-dollar companies in our business for whom, billions or hundreds of millions are a rounding error, and that really changes the nature of cost.
Does.
Yeah.
And and I'm going to quote back at you. We have to use this when John's in the room. I'm sure it's like a pop star having to sing their favourite, the audience's favourite song every gig they do. But you did coin the phrase peak TV. It may be a burden now or not, but 10 years on is quite a good time to revisit.
Yeah.
I think we weren't even at peak TV in 2015, were we? We got to sort of 20.
No.
We were peakier, and oh bloody hell, where are we now?
Yeah, I miscalled the top. I think I called it
You got it 8 years early.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But I didn't know that Amazon was going to be in our business, and that Apple was going to be in our business, and that Netflix was going to, spend the kind of money they spend.
So,
but I think it's a struggle because we have an industry that, from a structural standpoint, requires some consolidation, right? We can't have as many streaming services, certainly not global streaming services, and some of the great legacy majors in the United States don't really have enough scale. I think that's why you see between Paramount, Universal, and Warner Brothers, a desire to consolidate at least two of those companies to try to create another streamer that has enough scale globally to be able to compete. And it's also very challenging when you're competing against Apple. They have an operating system and a global device manufacturing business, and Amazon has shipping, everywhere in the world. On the Indian subcontinent, they do shipping really well. And Netflix has just gotten such scale, and the amount they spend is so great. Now, I really like where Disney is. I think that we made it across that gap. I think it was actually the acquisition of parts of Fox that included FX and the launch of the streaming service that allowed us to do that. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges, but it means that we're now really starting to focus on local, right? So, and I think Angela Jane's here somewhere. She just started at Disney here, and I think she's very good. And I think that the company, I know this because I'm spending money domestically, that we're really trying to reposition as much capital as we can outside the United States to try to get better. Because frankly, Netflix is really quite far advanced in terms of how they commission across the world.
Several years ahead of
Yes.
everyone else. So that consolidation, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, whatever that is, you anticipate that will happen in the next, you're the futurologist.
Sadly, I think it must.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be really hard for the creative community because essentially there'll be one less buyer. 20th Century Film, my colleagues, and Searchlight Film, who are part of Disney now, still make really, really good movies. But they don't build an entire separate slate in the
Yeah.
way they did when they were part of a freestanding company. And ultimately, consolidation means greater efficiency, which means, reducing some expenditures somewhere. But I really honestly think it's inevitable, because if you look at the balance sheet, the forward path of these companies independently, they really don't have any way of scaling to 150,
Global.
200, 250, 300 million global subscribers without some kind of consolidation.
So John, just to bring it back to a UK perspective for a minute, and I know you're very informed about this as well, is, a lot of the conference has been, where do we grow from here, and with a focus also on public service media. Where does public service broadcasting from the UK fit in that global market when, Disney are investing more here, NBC Universal investing more here,
Yeah.
many companies are American owned. What does that mean for this industry?
Well, look, I think I've always found that if I match a purpose-driven imperative with a business imperative, I get a good result. Because if I really focus too narrowly on a business-driven imperative, so let's just say that we say in the attention economy, it really doesn't matter what one is putting forth. It just matters whether one gains attention, right? Mm-hmm. It can be the truth, it cannot be the truth. It can be crass, it can be elevated, doesn't matter, right? The attention matters. I think for us, the quality of the attention really does matter. I think that we are at the opposite end of the spectrum from the disposable, here today, gone tomorrow. They used to say, my head of press used to say, don't worry about the news, it's going to be in the bottom of a birdcage tomorrow. Well, now it's going to be at the bottom of a birdcage in 5 seconds, right? And that's not the business we're in. If we try to compete in that business, we lose, right? So what we have to actually do is invest the time and the energy in making things that can endure. And that's very difficult when your business imperative is tomorrow, this quarter, this year, right? To say, okay, well, we're going to start working on Shogun, and 10 years from now, it's going to make a really nice impact. That's difficult, but I do think that anybody involved in business does better if they can think about today, and they can think about the quarter at hand, but they can also think about the long term. And ultimately, I think about this market as being the source of, many of the greatest stories, many of the greatest storytellers, many of the greatest writers in human history. We need this place to generate new things, right? And I would say, Disney has large sectors of its organization whose job it is to think about how to exploit Pinocchio, or how to, build a theme park based on some classic piece of IP. But it really has always done better. It's over a century old when it's had a leader in place, or leadership in place, that's also been willing to invest in and try new things. You have to do both, right? You have to continuously reinvent what already exists, but if you don't invest in new things, and I would just say, I think this market has to be the source of new things, right? I think about some of the most vibrant television that's come out, and I think about Adolescence, and I think about Fleabag, and I think about, Baby Reindeer, and I May Destroy You, and it goes on and on and on and on. And so I don't think the industry can remain healthy if we don't find a way of both doing that, right? And I think that the thing about public interest is it's as much as, I'm sure Tim feels the sting of public feedback every single day.
Every minute of every day.
It does provide a cushion, right? It provides an ability and a way of thinking more broadly and more long term. And so I think that's of vital importance.
Yeah. And I want to talk about storytelling as well. We were talking earlier, YouTube, and yesterday a lot of the sessions mentioned this, and of course it's a critical part now of the ecosystem for viewing. Viewing habits have changed massively. What does that mean for you, for somebody who's built a career and an incredible network based on long form, long arc, immersive 10-year development storytelling, versus something that can be made and distributed globally for free in 5 minutes? And what does that mean for storytelling as well? I'm really interested in what that
And Jane,
means.
I've always said, look,
Please tell us, by the way.
I'm willing to compete against anyone. I may prevail, I may not, but to compete against everyone is an entirely different matter, and you really feel that you are when you're competing against YouTube. And you know, the Nielsen gauge came out yesterday, last night, and YouTube had a little over 13% of the share of all the large televisions. That's not phones, that's just large TVs. And Disney was number 2 with a little under 10%, right? So they're really quite dominant. And they've become a utility, right? Because they're a search engine, they really, I also oversee National Geographic. You know, you can find history and science programming, short form programming that's really quite good. And so they're very difficult to compete with, but what I would say is, I can't imagine that any of us that are in long-form storytelling will prevail, will succeed, if we compete with YouTube on its terms. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is make something that's good enough and worthy enough of attention that it will not only cause people to put their phones down and devote their attention entirely to one screen, but better yet, perhaps watch it with somebody else that they care about, right? A friend or a spouse. And what I believe is that form of attention is just inherently more valuable. Just if you look at the Walt Disney Company, probably the most expensive thing you can do with your time, you know, is to go to a live concert or a sporting event or to a theme park, right? Probably theme parks #1. So why would people spend that kind of money? Well, because the quality of what they get from their attention is worth that to them, right? And so I would say we're not at the top of the scale in terms of live sport, but we have to be as close to that place as possible. I don't know what to do because again, if you're going to compete on volume against literally 100 million creators, you simply are going to lose.
So they have to coexist. They have to coexist and stick with quality.
And hope that there's still an appetite for long-form storytelling. What I will say, I've been encouraged, you know, as much as it was quite terrifying to be on the eve of launching a global program that was more than half in Japanese, on which we'd spent well over $200 million, right? And I thought, well, here's a test. And if I fail it, I have failed out. But I was really heartened. You know, there is a market for that. If we build it, they will come.
And that was curated, I know, from talking to Gina and you about that show and the team. That was curated. Every single moment of that show was loved and cared over and poured over and given the time and care it needed.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that's so hard about it is, and this is true of both Shogun and Alien Earth. You know, I was talking to a colleague, Deborah, last night, and you know, she watched Alien with her parents, and it really had to push them to keep going, because both those shows are really difficult, right? You really have to pay attention. There are a lot of characters, there are a lot of stories, and what we see on streaming platforms and on phones in general is just swipe, right?
And swipe up even now. It's just.
And so it's hard actually to set forth a complicated set. Gina Balian, my wonderful colleague who worked on both those shows with me, also worked on Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a very hard show to watch, right? They built an entire credit sequence to try to give you some sense of geographic orientation of this fictional map. But they kept going, they kept persevering, and it was very, very good. And eventually they kept feeding people back in. So what we're finding is that people are still finding Shogun. It's still doing an extraordinarily large amount of initial consumption globally because it's good. But good is a very, very hard thing to invest in because it does take so much care and so much time, and it's so difficult. You and I both know that as hard as we may work, there's an alchemy to it, right? Where sometimes you get the ingredients right in some extraordinary combination that's greater than the sum of its parts. And sometimes you don't.
And that's also about creative leadership, I think. We were talking earlier, you know, I think what you've always displayed, John, and I've really admired, is that, you know, you have creative authority and business authority, and that seems to be, and Disney does that more than many other companies, I think. They've been very supportive. Part of, I think, what they wanted from FX is a place that was an engine for new storytelling, because I think they realized that if they were in the established IP business only,
And look, that's a problem we're having culturally, right? I think we've all noticed how much the internet's changed since the advent of AI, and search engines just really are not what they used to be. And AI, feeds on all of the creativity that the human race has had since its inception, every piece of the written word. If it starts feeding on itself, it quickly goes sideways and goes downhill. So I think we're going to have to find over time some balance between human ingenuity. I mean, I think AI is an amazing tool, but it is not ingenious in the way that humans are. It's very good at recombining things that we've imagined. It's not very good at imagining entirely new things. And so there's got to be a place for human creativity in the economy, but I think we're going to struggle. I think it feels to me like we're overcorrecting right now towards these very large, really trillion-dollar companies. These companies that are really of the scale of the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, right?
And look how it ended for them. It didn't.
And I think they're not in the business of creating culture. They're in the business of exploiting attention, exploiting culture. And so those of us who are in the business of creating culture, I think, are under quite a lot of duress right now, right? I feel it. But I think it must come back into balance at a certain point, because you can't just squeeze the lemon, right? Eventually you've got to grow a new lemon, right? You can't get juice out of the same lemon forever. And I think we're going to find that relatively soon. Like, I don't know what the internet will look like in 5 years or 10 years, but I can see it's transforming very, very quickly right now. And I think that AI, it has to feed on human creativity.
And new human creativity.
It does.
So we're running out of time, but just a very quick one on the future for FX. What is that in the next, is it following the same path, sticking to the principles?
It's finding, after I came to the company, I ended up running it about 15 months after I joined as the head of creative. And we had a really vibrant slate. We had a show called The Shield. We had a show called Nip Tuck. We had a show called Rescue Me. I had worked on them, and I had worked on launching Rescue Me. But I was so thrilled to be handed this opportunity, and I was like, I'm the schmuck who has to figure out how to replace these 3 shows, right? And now I've had to do it generation after generation after generation. And so every time you have a success like The Bear, the clock starts ticking.
What's the next one?
What's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? And honestly, if one is honest, one does not know where that's going to come from. It's going to come from the most unexpected source. Often, Chris Storer, who made The Bear, had no prior experience. He'd helped Bob Burnham make a wonderful independent film called 13. He wasn't the director, but he was there. Who knows?
And no IP and no stars in that show when that came out. And now look, everyone involved in that now has incredible.
Our wonderful head of casting, Michael Catcher, when Jeremy Allen White signed on, said, "You just don't even know how big a deal this is. This guy is so good." There was a lot of excitement in the halls. And now he's a movie star. Now they're all movie stars. But, you can't just take and repurpose other people's work. You have to do some of your own. And all I can say is I have great faith in the creative minds in this country and in this industry to do that. You've been doing it for 400 years. You will figure out how to keep doing it. There will be business crises along the way. But I think Tim's right in the way he's focused this conference to say, okay, given there's a business crisis, now what are we going to do about it? And what I would say, here's what you do about it. You work with the best possible creators. You back them anyway. You find miraculously great stories that come out of seemingly nowhere.
Brilliant. Well, that's a brilliant way to end. John Landgraf, thank you so much for that.